The wind howled through the empty streets of Delwood like it was trying to blow away whatever remnants still clung to this place. Rotted awnings, rusted-out signs, and memories that had long since faded into the cracks of time. Delwood used to be a small industrial town tucked into the heart of Maine, but when the factories shut down and the new highway veered elsewhere, it became a blind spot. Forgotten by the world, just like Marty Blake, a man grasping at something already slipping from his hands. Martin hauled down the garage door, the metal joints creaking like the old building itself was groaning in protest. Blake's Auto Repair. The name was barely visible now on the weather-beaten wooden sign out front, with only the letters B and Pear still legible. Inside the cramped office, the wall clock had been stuck at 11:30 for over a year. He'd meant to replace the battery, but forgot, the same way he'd forgotten how to live a life with purpose. The air was thick with the sharp tang of old motor oil, scorched rubber, and stale coffee, all blending into the freezing cold. Martin stood for a moment in the shadows, his gaze drifting across dust-choked shelves of tools, the torn leather chair slumped in the corner, and a dead radio that hadn't made a sound in months. He remembered when, every evening, that radio would belt out classic rock, and he and his father would work on engines deep into the night. His father used to say, "If you can hear an engine purr, you'll understand the heart needs something steady too." But now, Martin's heart thudded with nothing but anxiety, confusion, and something colder than the wind howling outside. The business was a wreck. Customers had dwindled to a trickle, bills piled higher by the week, and the bank's patience had worn paper thin. Worse, the garage had been broken into twice in less than a month. The thieves didn't take much, a few tools, some oil, an old radio, but for Martin it was enough to make the walls feel like they were closing in. Still, he stayed, because there was nowhere else to go, and no one left to go with. His ex-wife had moved to Minnesota with her new boyfriend 2 years ago. His parents had passed away in the same brutal winter. Friends? They'd cleared out of Delwood long ago, and even when they were still around, all they had were stories about the old drinking days, and then silence. Now all Martin had was a rusty pickup truck, a dog long gone, and a garage nobody came to. The wind hissed through the fence behind the building, slipped beneath the garage door, and made Martin shiver. He pulled his coat tighter, lit a cigarette, and stepped onto the sidewalk. Delwood's main street had only 3 shops with their lights still on, an old pharmacy run by Mr. Reynolds, a grocery store that never stayed open past 7, and Maggie's Place, a cafe that hadn't seen anyone under 60 in years. The rest was shuttered windows, dust-caked signs, and a few flickering street lamps struggling to hold onto their last sparks of light. He was about to head back inside when he saw him. The man sat under a street lamp 2 buildings down. The pale yellow light blinked over a gaunt figure wrapped in a worn-out army jacket. He leaned against a shopping cart overflowing with cans, plastic bags, and tattered rags. The wind rattled the cans together with a hollow clink, a strange sound in a town that had forgotten how to make noise. Martin had seen him before, a ghost drifting through Delwood without a name. People here avoided folks like him. They shut their doors early, pulled the curtains tight, turned on the lights, and pretended the outside didn't exist. But tonight, something kept Martin from turning away like he always did. He stood still for a while, mind spinning. Bringing a stranger into the garage? Stupid idea. But maybe, if someone was around at night, the thieves would think twice, and in the man's eyes, there wasn't pleading, no threat, just presence. Martin crossed the street, hands buried in his coat pockets, walking slow, like he was testing his own decision. When he got close, he spoke. "You need a place to sleep?" The man looked up, blue-gray eyes catching the dim light. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, cautious. "I got a garage," Martin said, gesturing behind him. "Not much, just a back room with a folding cot, but it's warm. If you keep an eye on things at night, you can stay there. I can't pay you, but there's coffee, some food." There was a long silence. Martin felt his heart pick up, unsure why. Maybe fear. Fear of rejection? Or something harder to name. The man stared at him a while, like he was weighing something much heavier than the offer itself. Then, finally, he gave a small nod. "Name's Walter Crow." Martin led him back to the garage. The storage room in the back was usually where he dumped broken parts and worn-out tools. He gave it a quick clean, laid out a blanket, a thin mattress, and a jug of warm water. Neither of them spoke much that night. The next morning, Martin showed up earlier than usual. The front window was spotless. The tools were back in place, lined up neat on the shelf. No clinking cans, no signs of a homeless man. Just Walter, sitting quietly in the corner, reading an old scrap of newspaper. "I didn't ask you to clean up," Martin said. Walter shrugged. "It was messy." Martin stood there for a while, unsure of what else to say. There was something strange about the way Walter moved, not rushed, but not sloppy either. Like everything he did had been mapped out long before. The folding cot was perfectly stowed away, the water jug exactly where Martin usually left it, and the wrench, the one Martin thought he lost last year, was sitting right there in plain sight, exactly where it belonged. He wanted to ask, but he didn't. Ilwood had something peculiar. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settles over places that once lived and then slowly rotted. The kind of silence where you can hear power lines hum in the wind, dry leaves skitter across the pavement, and your own thoughts clatter in your skull like someone knocking from the inside. Martin had started noticing small things. Not because he tried, they found him. One Tuesday morning, as he stepped into the garage, like he always did, the rolling door was already open, something he'd never asked Walter to do. On the workbench, everything was arranged with unsettling precision. Screws sorted by size, screwdrivers by handle color, and a glove he'd lost months ago, cleaned and laid out like new. "You did all this?" Martin asked, catching Walter wiping down an old customer's pickup. Walter didn't look up. "I clean when there's nothing to do." "How'd you know where everything goes?" Walter gave a dry chuckle. "You look long enough, you remember." Martin offered a stiff smile, but something in him went cold. It was all too exact. 3 days later, a middle-aged man walked into the garage around 9 in the morning. Ball cap, worn leather jacket, face wrinkled like a man who'd chased a lot of highways. He shook Martin's hand and said, "Just wanted to thank you. My old truck, you fixed the spark plugs and air filter the other day. Didn't get a chance to tip you." Martin frowned. "I'm sorry, what? You don't remember? The old guy who works for you, white hair, eyes sharp as hell. He came to where I was parked by the gas station. Fixed it up. Didn't charge me a dime." Martin felt the hairs on his neck stand up. Walter didn't have tools. Didn't drive. As far as Martin knew, he hadn't left the garage at all. "You've probably got the wrong shop," Martin said slowly. The man looked confused. "No way. He was wearing a jacket with your logo." He pulled a crumpled business card from his pocket. "Blake's Auto Repair." Martin's handwriting. But he hadn't handed out a card in months. The man left with a handshake, and Martin stood there, coffee cooling in his grip. That night, Martin couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the fridge hum and the wind rake at the windows. The morning encounter looped in his mind like a busted tape. He didn't accuse Walter, but the certainty was gone. A homeless man, who knew the garage better than he did, who knew where tools were, knew habits Martin had never spoken aloud. He checked the old security camera mounted in the corner of the shop. The power cord had been pulled from the socket. One part of him thought, maybe the wind did it. Another part whispered, or someone else did. 3 days later, an unusual storm swept through Delwood. Thunder growled, rain hammered the garage's metal roof. Martin was about to turn off the lights when he heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, on the wet concrete out front. He cracked the door open. No one. But in the center of the garage lot, imprinted in the damp ground, were muddy footprints, leading from the street to the side door. He checked the door. Still locked. No signs of tampering, but on the handle a grease rag folded neatly as if left with intent. He walked into the storage room where Walter slept. The door was ajar, light off. Walter lay with his back turned, breathing steady. "Walter," Martin called softly. "Yeah." The reply came instantly, too alert to be groggy. "Did you go outside tonight?" "No. I hate rain." Martin paused. "Something wrong?" Walter asked, still not turning. "No, nothing." The next morning, Martin noticed something else. A regular had left a message on the answering machine. "Thanks for helping me last night. Didn't know you did car work that late." Martin hadn't touched a car. He hadn't even left the house. He began writing things down. Tools that just reappeared. Customers who'd been helped. The eerie tidiness of the garage. Everything too orderly for a place that used to be chaos. That evening, Martin sat across from Walter in the office, 2 mugs of cold coffee between them. Outside, the wind was rising again. "I get the feeling you know more than you let on," Martin said. Walter didn't answer right away. He turned his mug in his hands, then looked up at Martin. "Maybe," he said. "I used to know a place like this. Used to be mine." "You mean you had a garage?" "Just like this. Small, cold, lonely." "And then what happened?" Walter was quiet for a long time. Then he said, low, "I let it die. Not from theft, not from bills. I just lost the reason to get up in the morning." The words hit Martin like a punch. He didn't know how to respond. In that moment, the 2 men sat like mirror images, one from the past, one inching toward the same dead end. Martin left late that night. Before stepping out, he looked back through the window. Walter sitting at the desk, lamp glow on his weathered face like he'd always been there, even before Martin had arrived. And in his mind a question echoed. Not who Walter was, but what am I really needing from him? The next morning, Martin made 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on the table in front of Walter, who was reading his usual scrap of newspaper, his rough fingers turning the yellowed page. "What do you read every morning?" Martin asked, sitting down across from him. Walter looked up and gave a faint smile. "Nothing new, but sometimes you've got to reread the old stuff just to remember what you forgot." Martin nodded. Simple words, but they stayed with him the rest of the morning. That afternoon, a woman pulled up in a weathered sedan, around 40, brown hair, oversized sunglasses. Martin went to greet her. "Thanks for checking my rear tire yesterday," she said. "Car drives like a dream now." Martin hesitated. I don't think that was me." She raised an eyebrow. "The blue jacket, the garage logo? Pretty sure it was you." Martin glanced down. He hadn't worn the blue jacket in a week. "Must have been my coworker," he said quickly. "I'll pass it along." She smiled and drove off. Martin walked slowly back into the office, a lump of ice lodged in his gut. That night, he decided to test something. He took a specialty wrench, the expensive kind he used only for high-end clients, and locked it inside a filing cabinet drawer. No one saw him do it. He marked the handle with a faint scratch, just to be sure. 3 days later, the wrench was back on the tool rack. Clean, perfect, no scratch. The drawer was still locked, key still in Martin's pocket. He stared at it for a long time, pulled the unlit cigarette from his lips and tossed it. The next night, Martin brought a thin blanket and decided to sleep at the garage. told Walter the wiring needed monitoring overnight. Walter didn't argue, didn't even ask why, just nodded and returned to his usual corner. Martin lay on the shop couch, lights off. He didn't sleep. The wind slipped through the cracks, thunder rumbling far off. Beyond the thin wall, Walter was so still it was like he wasn't there at all. Around 3 a.m., Martin heard footsteps, very light, like someone walking barefoot through dust. He opened his eyes. The garage was dark, but faint orange light glowed beneath the office door. Moving quietly, he crept to the window and peeked in. Walter sat at the workbench. A toolbox was open in front of him, a small flashlight glowing beside it. He was cleaning each wrench, each screwdriver, not with routine, but with reverence. Martin watched as Walter held a cloth, gently wiping down each tool's handle like he was remembering something. After each, he placed it precisely back in its spot, not even a hair off. Martin didn't know why, but a chill ran down his spine. The next morning, Walter said nothing about the night before, but Martin couldn't forget. He didn't accuse, didn't press, but now every gesture, every habit felt like a reflection of something inside Martin he didn't want to confront. One afternoon, Martin went to toss the trash. When he returned, Walter was standing before the tool rack, staring at a photo on the wall, a picture of Martin's father, grinning beside his old pickup in his coveralls. "I've never seen him smile like that," Martin said without thinking. Walter turned. "That your dad?" "Yeah. He opened this place back in '79. I took over when he passed." Walter nodded. "Looks like a man who knew how to fix more than just engines." Martin paused. "Did you know him?" Walter looked back at the photo. Slowly, he said, "No. But some people, you can tell from a picture, they once held the world together with their hands." That night, Martin dreamed. He walked into the garage, but it wasn't the same. Cold white light, no dust, no smell of oil. The shelves were perfectly aligned but empty. Instead, there were photos of men, all wearing the same blue garage jacket, but their faces were smudged out, like a misprinted photo. In the middle sat Walter. His back was to Martin. When Martin got closer, he turned, and it was Martin. Older. Eyes hollow. Hands black with grease. Smiling like he'd been waiting a long time. Martin woke, drenched in sweat. The next day, he said nothing, just watched, recorded, memorized every word Walter spoke. At this point, Martin wasn't sure what he feared more, the truth or the quiet comfort Walter brought with him. Martin had never been the trusting type. He checked the doors 3 times before bed, folded his bills all in the same direction, and kept his spare key beneath a brick only he knew about. But lately he'd caught himself trusting Walter. Too much. Unconsciously. Dangerously. On Monday morning, while Walter was out buying bread, a rare errand he'd volunteered for, Martin used the chance to check his sleeping corner. He wasn't expecting to find anything, really, just needed to be sure. But he found a notebook. No name, no dates, just a few aged pages written in neat, rounded handwriting, the kind of penmanship that came from someone who once took meticulous notes. Feb 8, brake line worn temporary fix, customer didn't notice. Feb 14, met the same type as in 2007, another garage owner, same eyes. Feb 16, don't interfere too soon, let them reach the edge themselves. Martin froze. These weren't just notes. They weren't clearly a diary or a report or reminders. But whatever they were, one thing was clear. Walter had been observing him from the start. Martin held the notebook for a moment, then put it back exactly where he found it. When Walter returned, he brought 2 sandwiches and a couple cans of soda. He didn't ask anything. Martin didn't say a word. He couldn't focus for the rest of the morning. He pulled out his phone, fired up the old browser, and searched. Walter Crow plus Maine plus garage plus arrest. Nothing concrete. A few scattered blurbs from decades ago. No photos, no clear addresses. He changed tactics. Walter Crow plus bankruptcy plus missing. This time he got something. An article from 2009. Small headline, buried in the local news. Section. Garage owner disappears after bankruptcy. Walter Crow, 54. Vanishes from Millfield. Martin opened the story. Grainy black and white photo, but it was Walter. Younger, thicker hair, but the eyes were unmistakable. The article was short. Walter had owned Crow's Auto, ran into long-term losses, wife died of illness, son ran away. Then one day he vanished. Police found no trace, no papers, no body. Martin leaned back in his chair. The photo stared back at him like Walter was smirking faintly. That night, Martin didn't go home. He sat in the garage late, thoughts spinning in endless loops. "You used to live in Millfield, didn't you?" he asked, voice low. Walter set his mug of tea down, not looking up. "You found the article. Why did you leave?" Walter was silent for a long time, then said, "I didn't leave. I let go." Martin waited. He built a life from the smallest things. A tire, a bolt, a hot cup of coffee for a customer. But then my wife was diagnosed with cancer. Insurance didn't cover enough. I sold the house, sold the garage. Still wasn't enough. After she died, I realized everything I tried to hold on to meant nothing without the person I held it for. Martin stared at him, unblinking. I left it all. Went. No goal. No destination. Sometimes I fixed things. I watched. Watched who? People like me, Walter said, locking eyes with Martin. "You're at the edge too, aren't you?" Martin didn't answer. He got up, stepped outside, and stood in the middle of the cold garage yard. Above, the streetlight flickered like always. In the distance, the houses stood silent, like indifferent witnesses. He pulled out his phone and called an old number, the only friend he had in Millfield, Travis, a mechanic he'd met during training. They hadn't spoken in 7 years. "You remember Walter Crow, the old garage owner?" Martin asked. Travis hesitated. "Of course. He vanished like a ghost. Why?" "I think he's here, with me." Silence stretched on the other end. Then Travis said, "There's something you should know. The last week before he disappeared, he started acting like a different man. Kinder, more organized, cleaned the shop down to the last screw. Then he was gone." Martin read the engraving on the wrench over and over until it burned into his vision. "When you're ready to fix yourself." He couldn't tell if it was a warning or an invitation. The next morning, he searched for Dennis R. Connell, the name mentioned in the article as Walter's longtime assistant. He traced the number to a general store in Millfield. "Walter was a good man," Dennis said, voice raspy and slow. "But good men can fall apart in the quietest ways." "What do you mean?" "Back then, before he disappeared, Walter changed, stopped talking, worked late. I caught him cleaning each wrench like it was some kind of ritual. I asked him why, and he just said, 'I need to put everything in its right place before I go.' 3 days before he vanished, he gave me an envelope. Inside was a key and a note. 'If I don't come back, give this to the next one who needs to fix himself.' But I never knew who that person was. You still have it?" "I do. If you think it's you, I'll send it." That afternoon, Martin remembered a summer day when he was 10. His dad lay beneath an old Chevy, oil dripping on his shirt. Martin handed him the wrong tool. His father didn't scold him, just set it down quietly and reached for the right one. Later he'd said, "Cars don't break from a big crack, they die from a loose bolt, the small stuff. That's what can kill a man." Back then, Martin didn't understand. Now he did. A week after Walter vanished, Dennis sent a photo of the key, old plastic tag carved with 13. Back room. Martin printed it out, stared at it all morning. By afternoon, he stepped into the back storage room, the one his father had locked up since Martin was in high school. Behind 2 boxes of old air filters, he found something wrapped in leather, a keychain identical to the one in the photo. Faint letters on the back, Crow's Auto Tools. The small door at the rear of the garage was nearly rusted shut. The hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. Martin inserted the key, turned, opened. Inside was a small wooden-walled room with a desk, 2 file shelves, and a lamp. Blueprints on the wall, pencil-written notes faded to ghosts. In the desk drawer was a notebook. The first page read, "If you've made it here, it means you haven't let go." Martin sat down, put his hand on the blank page. Then he wrote, "I'm still here, but I don't know why." That night, Martin didn't sleep. But for the first time, it wasn't because of fear. He wasn't unraveling from worry. He just sat there, hand resting on an old wrench. He didn't clean it, didn't pick it up. He just kept it there, because in that moment, he knew. It wasn't just a tool, it was a reminder. The wind rose again over Delwood. Spring in this town didn't bring flowers, only cold mist and the mildew of soil that hadn't breathed in months. The chestnut tree outside the garage stood bare, but its roots dug deep into the frozen earth, just like Martin, still anchored to this place, though he no longer knew why. Since the day Walter disappeared, Martin had lived like a man in a trance. He worked steadily, cleaned for no reason, documented every customer even when no one asked. Every night, he sat alone at his desk, the engraved wrench still resting there, a strange compass for someone slowly drifting away from himself. Then one night, he stayed awake, not from insomnia, but because the silence had grown too loud to bear. He stood up, put on his coat, grabbed a flashlight, and walked slow circles around the garage, like he was waiting for something to happen. A noise, a shadow, a footprint in the concrete. But there was nothing. Only wind, a soda can toppling behind the dumpster, and the flickering yellow light from the street lamp, trembling like a flame about to die. Martin stepped into room 13, a space he'd begun to think of simply as Walter's room. The scent of old wood, dried oil, and damp paper blended into something oddly familiar. He sat at the desk and opened the notebook Walter had left behind. Still the same line, "If you've made it here, it means you haven't let go." Martin wrote beneath it, almost by reflex, "I'm still here, but I don't know why." He stayed still. Outside, the wind screamed through the tin siding, and the garage door rattled like knuckles on wood. Around 3 a.m., someone really did knock. 3 knocks. Slow, measured. Martin tightened his grip on the flashlight. No one visited a place like this at 3 a.m. without a reason. Or a problem. He cracked the door open. A young man stood there, maybe 19 or 20, rain-soaked hoodie, shivering hands, hollow face with dark bags under the eyes. "You Martin Blake?" the kid asked, voice raw like he'd just stopped crying. "I am. What's going on?" I was told to come here by this old man, white hair, beat-up blue jacket. He said if I needed a place, I should ask you." Martin didn't answer right away. The wind pressed against his back, heavy with a scent of wet soil, uncertainty, and something half-buried. "What's your name?" "Jaden." Martin studied him for a long moment. Then, wordlessly, he stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. Jaden sat curled up in the office chair, eyes glazed, but fighting to stay awake. Martin made coffee and set a mug in front of him. Neither spoke for a while. "Aren't you scared?" Jaden finally asked, almost in a whisper. Martin looked up. I mean, letting a stranger in. I could steal something, hurt you. That's what people always say about guys like me. Martin stared at the boy, then turned away. He thought about another man who'd once stood outside this garage on a night not so different. He hadn't begged either. He just stood there, present. I used to be, Martin said softly, but sometimes. What's scarier is when nobody knocks at all. Jaden didn't answer, but his hands stopped shaking. Martin didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because something had shifted inside him. He walked out to the back of the garage, to the spot where Walter used to sleep. He straightened the blanket, repositioned the old plastic chair, wiped down the dusty patch where Walter used to sit and read the newspaper. Each motion was quiet, exact, and oddly ritualistic, like Martin wasn't just tidying, but reenacting something sacred. When he returned to the office, Jaden had dozed off. Martin stood there, watching the boy's peaceful face, messy hair and skinny frame bathed in the soft yellow of the desk lamp. For a moment, he saw himself, 20 years ago, sleeping that same way in this very room, back when his father still lived. Maybe Walter had once watched him like this too. Just before dawn, Martin returned to room 13 and pulled out the old notebook. He flipped past his earlier entries, some ink still not fully dried. At the bottom of the page, he added, "Sometimes I don't know if I'm saving someone or just clocking in for the next shift." Before sunrise, a thought struck him, the old ceiling camera, the one he'd discovered unplugged long ago. He climbed up, plugged it back in, and waited for the indicator light to glow. The outdated interface blinked onto the tiny screen. A few clips had auto-saved. Martin began rewinding through recent nights. Most of it was nothing. Dust, darkness, an empty garage, until he reached a clip from the night Walter left. There he was, Martin asleep on the couch. Then a figure moved across the frame, slow, calm, face hidden, old blue jacket, never once turned around. Martin didn't keep watching. He switched off the monitor, pulled the plug. When Jaden woke, the light outside was soft and gray. He looked around, dazed, until he spotted Martin cleaning the garage windows. He said nothing, just got up, grabbed a second rag, and joined him. They didn't speak all morning. Around noon, Jaden asked, "What do you want me to do around here?" Martin answered, "Stay. Do whatever you can. Just remember to wipe your hands after touching anything rusty." Jaden smiled, for the first time. That night, Martin wrote one final line in the notebook. "Walter didn't teach me how to fix cars. He showed me how not to become one that's broken." The engraved wrench still sat there, but now it was only a tool, no longer a question. That night, Martin slept. No dreams, no jolts, and outside, the air began to warm. Spring arrived slowly in Delwood. The chestnut tree outside the garage had begun to bud, cautiously testing the cold wind. The steady drizzle darkened the concrete in the yard, as if time itself were soaking into every corner. Martin started waking earlier. He drank stronger coffee. He spoke less, but he lived on a different rhythm. Jaden was still there. He slept in Walter's old room and worked quietly, asking few questions. Sometimes, Martin saw him writing in a small notebook, just like Martin used to, just like Walter once had. One morning, Jaden asked, "Do you think he's still alive?" Martin knew he meant Walter. He didn't answer right away. Taking a sip of coffee, he looked out the garage window toward the spot where sunlight cut through the dust, where Walter used to sit and polish each wrench with near reverence. "Maybe," Martin said. "Maybe he's at another garage, showing someone else the way." Jaden nodded slightly. He seemed satisfied with that. A week later, Martin did something he hadn't done in 8 years. He left Delwood, just for a day. A cheap bus ride to Millfield, the town where Walter once lived. He didn't go to find Walter. He went to find whatever was left. Millfield was quiet, but not like Delwood. Not the silence of decay, but the hush after something once burned hot and had gone cold. Martin walked its old stone-paved streets, stopping in front of a small cafe with faded lettering, Maggie's Cup. He asked the elderly waitress about Crow's Auto. "That place is a woodworking shop now," she said. "Young guy from Chicago owns it, makes handmade stuff, sells it online, but the old workbench still there, too heavy to move." Martin thanked her and left. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He just stood outside for a moment, looking through the window. The glass reflected a man with silver hair, sunken eyes, but calm, grounded. On his way back to the bus station, he stopped by a used bookstore. The owner, long-haired, glasses perched on his nose, paused when Martin gave his name to buy a blank notebook. "Blake, you're the one running the garage in Delwood?" Martin blinked. "How do you know that?" "Couple of weeks ago, an old man came in asking for maps. Said he wanted to find small towns where garages were still alive. Asked about Delwood." Martin didn't reply. He just smiled, thanked him, and walked out. When he returned to Delwood, Jaden was out in the yard cleaning the air compressor. He looked up, seemed ready to ask something, but only nodded instead. That night, the two of them sat on the steps, drinking beer. They didn't talk about anything heavy. Not until Jaden asked quietly, "Do you think one day I'll leave too?" Martin looked at him, took his time answering. "I think everyone leaves, if they're just here to escape," he said. "But if you stay to become something, then Delwood becomes something too." Jaden nodded, but said nothing for a long time. The next morning, Martin took out the thickest notebook from room 13, spiral-bound, yellow pages. He wrote more than just a line this time, a full page. His writing was steady, like a mechanic turning bolts with practiced hands. "I'm not sure who I am in this story. Sometimes I'm the one closing the door. Sometimes I'm the one holding it open for whoever comes next. But I know this, none of us is the center of any garage. We're the ones who wipe away old grease, who keep the door open when the wind howls, and who remember to shut the lights off when they're no longer needed." Walter came and left. Jaden came and hasn't left yet. I'm still here. Each of us passes through, leaving a few faint fingerprints on the concrete walls. But it's those prints that keep the walls standing. If one day you walk in and I'm not here, don't look, don't mourn. Just wipe down the door handle, open the notebook, and write a line. That'll be enough. He closed the book and placed it on the shelf. At the end of the month, a man from out of state brought his truck in for repairs. He said, "Heard about this place from an old man at a gas station up north." Martin didn't ask any questions. He just smiled and motioned for Jaden to go greet him. One evening, as a crimson sunset spread across the garage wall, Jaden picked up a stick of chalk and added a line to the signboard beneath the freshly painted words, "Delwood Repair Station. Keep the light on." Marty saw it. He didn't correct him, didn't wipe it away. He just nodded. And on another night, calm sky, thin fog, no wind, there came a knock at the door. No one answered right away. But a few minutes later, the lights came on, and the door slowly opened. Appreciate you staying with us. Not everyone gets to hear the untold. If this intrigued you, drop a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the Untold Story to uncover even more.